Thank you, Catherine, and I confirm that I'm in Leinster House, and I've been listening to the discussion here again, and I want to thank all the witnesses for their submission. I suppose the first thing I would want to say is that, and you would know that creating a culture of zero tolerance to bullying behaviours in a school to enable everybody within that school environment to feel safe takes time. And the more bureaucratic and the more demands that have been put on teachers inside that school environment, the more difficult it is to create that positive culture. I have seen it done, and it's more in spite of anything that it has been done than because of resources or recognitions or supports that have been given to the schools. So we have models of very good practice there. A couple of things stand out for me, and I just want to ask you around, you have cited here that a fully trained member of staff should be available with allocated time as a behaviour support teacher. And I do think that that would be a really good idea in having that allocated teacher. Would you see that teacher as having teaching responsibilities besides that, and how much teaching responsibilities, how can that be done in a way that somebody is, because often what you find is that somebody is appointed, but realistically they don't have the time to do what they need to do in order to be able to do the job properly. So I just want to ask you that there about time, and then on the other suggestion that's been made by the ACCS is the access to a psychotherapist or a counsellor, because again, I find that those therapies are not available, certainly not available when they're needed within the school. So do you think that those are realistic asks? And I suppose the cost of not having those personnel appointed or allocated, if you like, what is the cost in terms of overall education or education provision within the school?
I'll take the question there that you addressed to me first, Deputy. And the reality is that if you are going to appoint somebody to that kind of position, again, you'd have to look at bespoke solutions for different types of schools and so on. That we have schools with 25 or 6 children, we have schools with 1,000 children. So you'll obviously have to look at something that's index linked. But it's an unrealistic thing to think that we could have somebody totally devoted, and we appreciate that. You can't have everything you want. But what could be done is that as part of the allocation for SEN, that there is a section, or that there is extra time granted for a person to deal with that specifically, and that they would, the person that was doing that will say in an average size school, if you want to take 200 children, will say that you would have somebody, and that they would have an allocated time during the week when they don't have teaching duties, where they would be able to attend to such matters with the support of the principal. But I think it would make a very significant difference, because then you would be able to deal with things in a considered way, a less emotional way. Sometimes if something kicks off in a class, it's difficult. There's a lot of other children there and so on, and the teacher has to deal with everything as well as this particular incident and so on. That somebody who's a step removed makes things a little bit easier and more considered. So I think that there is an approach in that way, that an extra allocation of time specifically for dealing with behaviour and such issues.
Okay, and in relation to access to counsellors or to those supports that are needed, say psychotherapists?
Yeah, I would say, could I just say in terms of look, as a management body, we would support the NCSE pilot projects around support for schools, which is a good concept. I would have to say, though, in terms of the Irish context, we don't really do therapies well a lot of the time because we don't invest enough in them. Is that okay? So we have now schools, and some of the larger schools are investing and are purchasing in their own expertise in terms of therapies. This is one example of it in terms of psychotherapy from one of the schools that we have referenced, and they find it invaluable, because if somebody is dealing with a mental health issue, you need somebody with that specialist skill set to be able to support them. In a similar way, and I know Damien's mentioned it, but it's a similar thing around the therapies. When I was involved, we had a Clooney Centre, which was for children with autism. But again, we found it very difficult in our health area to get any access to occupational therapy or speech therapy. So we purchased our own. Is it okay? We had to. Because ultimately, if we're going to have children and we're going to talk about inclusive education, well, we have to support it. And inclusive education is not cheap. Yeah. Is it okay? It's very expensive. And if you are looking for the proper outcomes, you have to invest. I think, honestly, every school in the country should have access to a psychotherapist. It doesn't have to be on a daily basis, but I'm sure as principals, both Damien and Rachel would love to be able to call on a trained psychotherapist to be available when they have children who are presenting with significant challenging needs, perhaps as a result of bullying and other reasons. Is that okay?
I agree with you 100%. And in terms of the allocation, you see, we're told on this committee that, and I'm talking, I suppose, in general in terms of what you said about autism and behaviours there that, that are part of the condition that may occur from time to time. And where the schools will say we need X amount of resources to be able to deliver positive outcomes for that child, then they need to be given those resources to do that. But where you have CNOs that are saying, well, the allocation is done and that's basically it, regardless of how many you decide or how many people you decide to provide education for, I think is extremely destructive. And not only destructive, but I think it's dangerous in that situation to do that. So I suppose, how can we have better collaboration between schools and CNOs and NEPs and those?
I would say one thing: significant support for the NCSE and Department of Education school support programme. Invest in it. It's a pilot at the moment. Invest in it on a region. They're looking at possibly setting up 10 regional support teams with significant personnel, be they speech therapists, occupational therapists, which means that the children would have access to personnel on a consistent basis, but also consistently meeting with the same person.
Okay.